Good morning, members. We've already formed a quorum, so we can start the meeting. We need to elect a chairman, but before I receive any nominations, I would like to check with you if you need to declare any interest. If not, then nominations for the chairmanship. You be the chairman. No, I'm not going to be the chair. Nominations, please. Mr. Mock. I would like to nominate Mr. Mock. Not really, are you serious? Please take up the chairmanship. I was the first to take a seat, and that's it. Mr. Chairman, I won't object to it, but I have not thought of being the chair. It doesn't matter. I think you're the best candidate. Any seconder? Seconded. Mr. Wu seconds the nomination. I think it's a very technical, very specialized area. Thank you. I was about to say that every one of us has to breathe. All right. Item 2 on the agenda. Let's not waste time. Let's invite the team from the administration to give us a briefing. Yes, do we want to have a deputy chairman? No one has requested, but I still have to go through the motions. Sorry, I'm new to the job. So do you want to elect a deputy chair? If not, then meeting with the administration. Item 2 on the agenda. I'll invite the administration to brief us on the bill, and then I'll open the floor to members for questions. Administration, please. So I would like to introduce the guest speakers here. Ms. Christine Low, Under Secretary for Environment, Mr. Andrew Lai Chi-Wah, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Pan Sik-Wing, Principal Environmental Protection Officer Air Policy from the EPD, as well as Ms. Selena Lau, Senior Government Counsel from the Department of Justice. I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Christine Low, the Under Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I think the bill is a simple one, and then the background has already been the subject matter of briefing to the subcommittee under the Legislative Council. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to say that we are going to tighten up the AQOs. Probably you are more concerned about the 36-month grace period. In the past, you did ask a lot of questions about that, and then you must have seen that in this bill. We hope that the effective date should be the 1st of January 2014. We really hope that this Bills Committee will expeditiously finish the scrutiny of the bill. It would be best if you can complete the task before you go into the summer recess, and then we need to take time to finish the preparatory work, and then end of summer holiday we'll be able to bring this into operation on the 1st of January 2014. I don't think I need to talk about other things, but we really hope that you can enlighten us as to the direction of the discussion. because we may have to call in other departments to give explanation to you. So I will be asking you to tell me about the direction of the debate. Questions, please. Mr. Shahlahim. Mr. Chairman, personally, I support the bill. In fact, we have waited for it for a long time. Now that the administration is to present this bill to us, it means that the pace has been quickened. In fact, the PAC had a discussion of it previously. We welcome such a legislative move so that we can have some improvement of our air quality, though the improvement may not be very substantial. I'm quite new to this area, but this is because of my desire to improve the air quality, and that's why I've joined this this bills committee. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the introduction of the new air quality objectives. If I may clarify this point, for the World Health Organization, we have interim as well as ultimate targets. We are told that within this bill there will be a 5-year review mechanism. Do we actually have a concrete timetable? That is, when we are going to achieve the ultimate targets, that is their highest targets. For the 5-year review mechanism, does it mean that in the review report you would be promising further enhancement of the air quality, or we will be told by the director of EP that it's fine and we don't need to do much else? So what actually is meant by the 5-year review mechanism? Mr. Chairman, for the 5-year review mechanism, well, the law would say that there must be at least one such review. It is possible to have an additional one other than the mandatory one in the 5-year period. As to whether at the end of a review we have to further tighten it, well, revision. I think probably by revision you would like to see it being gradually tightened. At a PAC meeting, we learned about the mainland model. Say, for example, perhaps they could tighten all the standards, or in a particular area, they might have some new arrangements, new procedures, and then a particular pollutant would be subject to tightening up. So it may be partial, it may be across the board. I think probably you are most concerned about the determination of the administration. Probably you would say that if we are determined, then you would be aiming at tightening up the standards. I think you would be most concerned about the latest case, that is the fuel switch when the ocean-going vessels berth. As far as SO2 is concerned, we don't rule out further considerations. I'm not sure whether I've made myself clear. So, are we going to wait for the 5-year review cycle, or can we review it earlier? So probably you're interested in the determination of the administration. Well, a lot of vesting powers will be in the hands of the administration. You may do it, you may not do it. You may have a review, but you may not always tighten up the standards. But the broad direction should be further enhancement. As pointed out in the criticisms of the PAC, the AQOs should have been renewed or revised much earlier, but somehow you have stalled. Now, we have waited for a long time before we see this bill. For the 5-year review mechanism, I hope the administration will give a public undertaking. That is, by way of the review, the pollutants will be subject to further tightening up, so that ultimately we can reach the ultimate targets of the WHO. Maybe you say that in 10 years' time, things would change drastically, and even the targets of the WHO would be further raised. I really hope that in your bill and in your public statements, you would promise that the 5-year review mechanism means that the government is really determined to do something about it. And you must have all the support measures in place so that it won't be rendered into empty words. I won't object to it. In fact, we have a close liaison with the administration, with the Legislative. I don't think the government can really get away from it. If you say that every year we have to come back to the Environmental Affairs Panel and give a report, then it means that there is a mechanism to enable the Legislative to play a monitoring role. But then have it included in the bill means that we are having a 5-year review cycle. And for my colleagues in the EPD, when they know that the bill has to be, when the legislation has to be reviewed, that it means that they have to do it in a meticulous way. But in fact, we don't rule out that the Legislative asking us to come back on a yearly basis. We can report back to you, though this is not statutory, like the 5-year mechanism. Now, in terms of vehicular emission and other types of emission, as well as the cooperation with Guangdong, we have many initiatives. And from time to time, we come back to explain the matter to you. And giving you an overall report on an annual basis, to me, I think it is a appropriate arrangement. So maybe on an annual basis, we can have an overall report. If you believe that we are really concerned about air quality, then you don't need to worry. Yes, we won't be worried. Well, in the past, we have the experience that policies would change when the administration changes, when the term of the government expires. So I think you must assure us that the administration will not be allowed to dodge from the responsibilities. I don't think I'm going to impose very strict time limits, but still bear in mind the time management. Mr. Frankie Yik, and then Kenneth, and then Mr. Gary Chen. Mr. Wu told us about his view. First of all, let me say that I strongly support the amendment exercise. We really want to improve the air quality in Hong Kong. Everybody wants to see this happen. I agree that the Bureau is very determined to improve the air quality. But then if we say that there must be a tightening up once every 5 years, then I won't agree to it. Now, the administration has come up with a large number of initiatives because some of them are being implemented or will soon be implemented. As to what will happen in 5 years' time, you identify the problems, but you take time to implement them before you can reach new targets. So I think we have to watch the development. Now, for the replacement of diesel vehicles, it takes time to implement it. But if we impose this on the administration and say that at the end of 5 years there must be tightening up, it will be too rigid. Mr. Chairman, I agree.
So first of all, we mentioned 5 years because the standard has been adopted by the international arena before, and we didn't state clearly that it is definite. It doesn't mean that you need to tighten it every 5 years. There are opportunities for us to discuss with Legislative on the future long-term measures to reduce emissions, which will enable us to understand which sort of pollutants we'll need to tighten up the restrictions on. Well, I think that you could accept a review once every 5 years. It doesn't mean that we'll need to tighten the restrictions every 5 years, because that would reduce flexibility. Mr. Chan Carlock, thank you. Oh yes, we support the amendment of the bill to try to enhance air quality and to set standards. This is our main objective. If we don't do it, then we are not doing our job in adopting measures which we have considered for a long time. The Undersecretary talked about the transitional period. So I would like to ask if there is a room for tightening. And I think that we can make a bit more effort when we're scrutinizing the bill. If time permits, I hope to also hear public views. Because we're talking about 36 months, it might seem a bit too long, but if you hear public view, they might say that it's a too short a period. This would help us to try to come up with a better amendment. So I do hope that we'll try to amend the bill as soon as possible, and also to allow related groups or organizations to hear their views, to let them express their views. So I hope that there would be a public consultation or a public hearing. And I remember that public consultation might take about 9 years. I do hope that we'll be able to also have the opportunity to consult the public. Yes. We would also ask all members if it is necessary to seek the views of the public. Ms. Low, please. Yes, we welcome public consultation. Thank you. Mr. Chen Hak-kang. The tightening of the AQOs, well, we've talked about it for a long time, and we do hope the administration will adopt this as soon as possible. And we are also in support of a public consultation, because there are many organizations that have different views on the restrictions of the pollutants. So I do welcome a public consultation. I have 2 questions I would like to follow up. In the paper, the administration said that with the effect of the date of the new AQOs, some projects might need to adhere to the new AQOs. So before you put this into effect, would there be some argumentative large projects that would apply to the government in advance, so that they wouldn't need to comply with the new AQOs? So would you forecast that there would be such major projects applying in advance? And which projects do you think would most likely apply for beginning of the project before the new AQOs come into effect? Chairman, the new AQOs, once it is approved by the LegCo, we hope that it would come into effect January 1st of 2014. This would affect the all projects under the EIAO, which is the Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance. Because the air quality assessment under the EIA ordinance also use the same standards as we do. And we understand that during this time, well, the government has already stated in 2010-2011 that there is a desire to adopt the new AQOs. Some new infrastructure projects during that time are needed to conduct the EIA, and we have already notified them that the AQOs would be tightened very soon, and they would come into effect at around January 1st of 2014. Therefore, when they were conducting the EIA, it would depend on when the EIA could be completed and submitted to the government. If the report was to be completed by 2012, of course, then they would use the current standards. But if it is a major project, that they would still be conducting the EIA in 2013-2014, then they would have no other choice but to comply with the new AQO standards. Let me give you an example. The airport authority wanted to build a third runway, and because the EIA needs a long time to complete, and it is forecasted that the EIA would not be completed until 2013-2014, so the airport authority expressed its view to the government that even though the new AQOs have not come into effect, they are going to use those standards as their foundation. We, as a monitoring authority, would still adopt the current standards for the projects that are being conducted currently. But for those 2013-2014, then they will need to adopt the new AQO standards. Yes, this is a relief for many green groups, because many people are afraid that some projects would try to speed up their EIAs so that they would still be able to adopt the old AQOs. Thank you. I have another question. Mr. Lai, do you have any supplement? EIA that are submitted to the government before the end of this year would still be able to use the current standards. But once the new AQOs come into effect, for those that are submitted to the government 2014, then we would use the new standards. So we would use the EIA submission as the boundary. But would it make it confusing? Because some projects, well, I'm not sure whether this is possible, but let's say the EIA has been completed a long time ago, but it would not be implemented until 2015. So would some people prefer to complete the EIA early in advance and then try to adopt in 2015? Yes, this is why I use the term, to start construction. Well, let's categorize the different projects. Some projects have been committed by the government, although the EP has not been completed, and they have already committed to using the new standards. For major infrastructure projects such as the third runway by the airport authority, the airport authority has already committed itself to using the new standards. Well, I think that you are not worried about these projects, because these projects have already tightened themselves even before the projects have started. Now, let's talk about those that are conducting the EIA right now. You have the concern that some projects might submit their EIA this year so as to evade the tightening of the standards. Well, you asked me about my forecast. Well, I really can't forecast anything. I can't predict anything because, we work by mechanism. For projects that need to conduct EIA, they do need a certain period of time. Well, I really can't give you an answer to the question. Would it be clearer if we come up with a list, Mr. Lai? Let's put it this way. some EIA are still in the drafting process as to where the project can be submitted to the government. Well, it depends. We cannot approve or consider any of the projects before it has been completed. Well, if they submit it this year, then of course we would look at it using the current EIA standards. But if they are submitted next year, then we would use the new AQOs. Well, we can talk to the related departments and ask them which EIAs are in the process and are almost near completion. Yes, we could use those figures to try to do a forecast, because we don't know, which month they would submit it. We don't know when the report would be finally submitted. Well, it needs to be transparent. Well, if it wouldn't start construction until 3 years later, then I think we'll need to consider those projects. I'll follow up the second question. I'd like to look at Annex B. Well, you all believe that with the new AQOs, the air quality would be enhanced. But if you look at Annex B, in the number of exceedances allowed, let's say it's sulfur dioxide, the number of exceedances allowed is 1, respirable suspended particulates 1, nitrogen dioxide 3. But under the new AQOs, the number of exceedances allowed have been increased. For example, sulfur dioxide from the existing AQOs to proposed AQOs from 1 to 3, PM 2.5 from no exceedances allowed to 9, and then nitrogen dioxide from 3 to 18, and from ozone from 3 to 9. Well, we have tightened the AQOs, but the number of exceedances allowed have been increased. Is there a conflict in this? You came up with new AQOs, but then you would allow more exceedances. Does that mean that the government is not confident with the emissions reductions? Is that the reason for these new increased exceedances allowed? Well, I don't think you really penalize the exceedances. And if you allow so many exceedances, then I don't think you need to tighten the AQOs. Yes, we've always permitted exceedances, even in other countries. I'll ask Mr. Pang to give us an explanation. Thank you. The WHO provides guidelines that as we need to set statutory standards, there needs to be objectives and to allow the number of exceedances. We need to consider special circumstances, for example, climate changes or something out of our control that would affect the air quality. So you would see exceedances allowed in international standards. So why is there an increasing number of exceedances in the proposed AQOs? Yes, I understand this. I understand that there are these standards allowed in other countries, but you are now allowing more exceedances. It's just like teaching a student to just get 80 marks instead of 100 marks. Well, do you have the determination to do it? Well, yes, we need to look into this question. It is very scientific. I think that with professors present, it would be easier for you to understand. We have a very close relationship with some professors, and they're also asking the same question. So, we will need to first talk about the number of exceedances allowed, what number is acceptable, and secondly, when we are setting the standards, what would the considerations be, and how are we going to set the standards? Mr. Pang, I hope to also supplement.
超標嘅數目
For the number of exceedances allowed, in fact, we have made reference to the European Union. We've looked at their figures. The number of exceedances allowed proposed for Hong Kong would be similar to those in EU, except PM10 or even PM2.5. For both, we are very much under external influence. Local experts and also scholars at the Hong Kong UST told us that on average, 60% of the PM10 arise from external emissions. Therefore, even at the Tap Moon monitoring station, which serves as the ambience measurement, we have seen exceedances, and therefore we have to be more relaxed as far as the standard is concerned, and we should accommodate a greater number of exceedances to be allowed. Otherwise, we are on a par with the EU practice. This is your first meeting, so we are sort of trying to find out what are of interest to you. At later meetings, we can give you more in-depth briefings. For the number of exceedances allowed, you see the figure 9 for 3 pollutants, and 18, yes, 18 as well. Let me deal with it first. Now, for the proposed AQOs, and for our new air plan, you can see that when we implement all the emission reduction measures, we'll still fail the NO2 roadside figures. I have to tell you why this is so. And therefore, even when we try to tighten up the AQOs, the number of exceedances to be allowed would have to be increased. Later on, I can sort of make use of diagrams to explain it in a more scientific way. For PM10, PM2.5, and ozone, take today and yesterday as an example. We are subject to the outside influence. This is a characteristic of Hong Kong's air picture. Now, we try to ask you to give permission to tighten up the AQOs and give us a greater number of allowances. It's not that we lack the will, it's a matter of we are being frank. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to waste the meeting's time. I hope that when the administration comes next time, please give us the background information and justify the larger number of exceedances to be allowed. I understand that the administration does have the data telling us as to on how many occasions the standards have been exceeded. Yes, at the next meeting, we should be provided with more scientific information. However, I just wondered if we can address it from a point of principles. In the past, you were not able to reach such targets. Now you think that you can reach the targets. But if you do exceed the targets, what are you going to do? We should be giving 30 spanks. It's useless. Maybe I'll give the floor to another member, Ms. Ho, for the first round. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I had to urgently attend an interview, and so I was late. I had to be interviewed by a media organization about the formula ban. So just remind me if my question has already been asked. Now, when we look at the bill, we see that there will be a number of stages, a number of phases. There was a memorandum, a technical memorandum issued by the director to the project proponent, and then the proponent would come back, and then the director would say whether the EIA would be acceptable or not. Now, for the new AQOs, they will come into effect end of this year. I want to know how the transition will be managed. So please give us a flow chart so that we know at which point the new AQOs would kick in. Say, for example, a EIA report underway. What will happen to it? Say, for example, the first draft has been submitted, the director is not happy. Does it mean that the EIA has to be governed by the new AQOs? In the past, we did have a large number of EIAs. I want to know whether you know very well that in the past you were not able to meet the requirements, and so you want to be frank with us and you want to relax the number of exceedances allowed. And what about the projects? I think in the past many proponents were not able to deliver their promises on air quality. So please tell us whether you would ask the proponents to tell you about the degree of departure from the air quality assessed. In this way, we can tell whether you are being realistic when you say that you are being frank and honest, or whether we can be more ambitious and try to tighten up more, or whether you would frankly tell us that in any event it is going to be exceeded. Otherwise, perhaps we should change the methodology of assessment, and this way we will get an estimate which is closer to reality. So can the administration tell us on how many occasions there was a EIA report, and yet when the project was commissioned, in fact, the pollutant levels were very different? I think we're talking about two different things. Say, for example, you want to build a power plant. It's easy to measure the emissions on a daily basis. So when you issue an EP, you can tell about the amount of emission. Or say, for example, you build a road, and so you are taking measurements as to the vehicular flow, and so will be given data from others. Because for the traffic flow, we have some source data, and we have to rely on others to give us the information. Now, after the road has been built, as to the total number of vehicles traveling on the road as well as the total emission, we may not actually try to collect such data. But then, as to the role of the EPD will be interested in the overall emission in Hong Kong. So perhaps we should discuss the matter on two fronts. For the first part that you referred to, it has to do with the EIA. And there are different kinds of projects under the EIAO. As to the latter half of your question, that's about exceedances. Should we sort of discuss the two together, or what? Maybe Mr. Pang or Mr. Lai can supplement. Ultimately, we need to talk about the exceedances as well as ways to arrive at the figures. Sometimes it's not that easy to make the analysis. Before you give an answer, I think we start to introduce a time limit. 5 minutes each, as more and more members are interested in asking questions. And in fact, in any event, we can have another round of questions. Mr. Chairman, today we'll be most interested to find out as to the areas of concern to members. For those raised today, I think we need to come back to you and brief you on such topics in greater details. So for today, it is not the occasion to give very detailed answers. I also know that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you're going to arrange for a public hearing, and probably the community can also bring in extra questions for us to ponder. Yes, but still, members' questions today will still be very useful. It's fine if you can't give us an answer today, because we'll have more meetings in the future. I just want to raise my concern, and I look forward to a paper from the administration. For the Undersecretary, please don't draw the boundaries of our debate and say that we shouldn't be discussing the matter in this way. I think we try to bring in associated issues so as to help us to come to a decision. You told us that experts will be coming in next time, other than inviting the green groups, and of course we know about their mission and vision. What about the scholars, the academia? I think they have the methodology of assessment and whatnot. So perhaps we should also ask them to come next time so that they can transfer knowledge to us. Well, the public hearings are open meetings, so you can invite experts that you think are of importance. Mr. Chairman, I'm not trying to set the parameters of the discussion. I just want to know how we can do the homework in preparation for the next meeting. Yes, I also know that we can only get initial answers for today's meetings. For today's meeting, we just ask members to place the orders so that you can do the homework. Mr. Lai. Well, as to how the EIA process will be affected by the new AQOs. Well, at 3 stages, probably an EIA would have something to do with the AQOs. First of all, when a project proponent is to suggest a project, then the study brief has to be submitted to the administration, so that he will tell the administration that, say, for example, I would like to build a bridge. I want to look at the air quality, water quality, noise, impact, etc. And then the EPD will be asked to comment as to whether the scope is adequate. So we try to find out whether anything has been omitted. So perhaps we'll ask for a more in-depth study in relation to a particular area. So if you want to go into a particular area, you have to be governed by the existing legislation. And after the proponent has finished with the report, he has to submit it to the Director of EP. The DEP would, in the case of air quality, rely on the existing AQOs to judge the EIA report. Now, say for example, come next March, we have to use the new AQOs if they have come into operation. Say for example, a EIA has been passed by the EPD, and the Director of EP may impose additional conditions. If the proponent finds that it is difficult to achieve that, and if he seeks a variation of the EP conditions, that is, if he would like to revise the EP, then the Director must also take into account the prevailing AQOs and come to judge whether the revision would go against the current AQOs. Therefore, we're saying that for EIA, which are part and parcel of projects already approved earlier on, much earlier on, and they're approaching the end of their project time, and they just want to make some variations. Say, for example, in the beginning, maybe they told the DEP that they would complete the job in August 2014. Owing to inclement weather, they may have to ask for another 6 months. It is quite normal. So when they launch such an application to the director is supposed to use the prevailing AQOs, but then it was given approval a few years ago. It will be difficult to ask the proponent to say that while he's approaching the end of the project, he has to come up with a new EIA so as to comply with the new AQOs.
So that is the reason why we propose a 36-month transitional period to deal with such cases. So I think that that would perhaps we could go into detail later on. Well, the second round of questions, I think we really need to be more brief. This is a follow-up question. Well, the EIA, you could actually try to speed it up because up till the end of this year, the old AQOs would still be in place. And if the DEP would set some new additional conditions, would the proponent in submitting the EIA would already be past the 2013 and it would then need to comply with the new AQOs? Well, of course, I personally hope that the new AQOs could come into effect as soon as possible, or to use the highest possible standards. But I'm just afraid that that some proponents might try to speed it up, and then during this time you will need to decide whether you would adopt the current standards or the new standards. Well, Mr. Chan Hak-kang has already asked a question. I think you are talking about the risk and what the procedures would be. I think that we would submit a paper next time to address these questions. Okay, 5 minutes each starting from now on. I think the 5 minutes would include both the question and the answer. We want to try to control better and not to just focus on one question for over 10 minutes. Mr. Kwok, well, I was a bit late because I needed to go to an interview at a radio station. Well, you might have already answered the question. I asked this question before. There are 6 sets of figures we need to know. First, how many proponents have already applied for the study brief, and how many study briefs have already been approved, but the EIA has not yet been done, and how many EIAs have already been started. And fourthly, how many EIAs have already been submitted waiting for approval, and fifth, how many EIAs have already been approved and waiting for the environmental permits, and sixth, how many projects have already been completed but you need to continue with the monitoring of under the technical memorandum. So how many projects are there? I hope that if you could give us these 6 sets of figures, it would help us better understand the transition. If not, it's quite abstract. I think I raised this question before. Yes, we'll try to be as detailed as possible because we understand that members are very concerned with this, and we do want to be clearer. Yes, it will be more objective if you could have these figures. Yes, we would provide you with the figures next time. Second question, I've also raised this matter currently. The under 7A review once every 5 years. How can we extend to the views of the public to ensure that the public will be able to participate and give their views in the review once every 5 years? Could we also include a public consultation into under 7A? I hope that you would consider this fact. Would you consider? No, I'm not going to answer this question yet. Oh, it's not whether we allow public participation or not. Through LegCo, some things could be done. if you stipulate that every time we consult the public, there should be a statutory mechanism, what kind of mechanism would that? Well, please let us know if you have any suggestions or ideas. Well, I'm just trying to consider, what is actually under the Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance now, because we've used this mechanism for a long time that it allows public consultation participation. I think that for the every 5-year review, the public should also have the right to express their views. Well, I don't have any answer for this right now. We could follow up in our next meeting. Mr. Kwok, if you do not have other questions, Mr. Tang, please. Thank you. First, I'd like to express my conflict of interest. I'm a bit from the Vehicle Repair General Union, but I do not take any remuneration. So I'm just concerned with this. I've looked at the blueprint and seen the 7 standards. For the layman, you don't know what it is. So can you maybe simplify it further? That for the 7 standards, you put a very clear table. For example, currently, what do you think the pollution is coming from? Is it from local or from the mainland? And what kind of pollutants are actually polluting it? Is it from cars, ships, power plants, or from construction? I hope that there would be a very clear table to tell us about where all this pollution is coming from. Of course, I know that you have stated in the paper about what's going to happen starting from 2015. But could you simplify it further so that the public, especially for people from the industry, to understand what the new standards would be and how it would affect them? Well, I'm not an expert, but just now the administration said that talked about today's weather, that there would be PM, and many of them actually come from outside Hong Kong, or mainly from the Pearl River Delta. Well, of course, I understand that you would consider all these factors. Could you really comply with the new standards? I know that you've already signed some agreement with the Pearl River Delta. How can you push this forward simultaneously? And to give us a paper on this partnership. Of course, it has nothing to do with the amendment, but I just hope that, putting something on paper would make it clearer for the general public. The air quality not only affects the EIA, I think that it also affects many of the industries. Cars would need to be inspected every year, and that is under the Transport Department and the EMSD. So once the new standards come into place, would that affect the procedure of the car inspection? Of course, I'm not seeking for an answer today. I hope that you would supply us with the answers later on paper. It's very good that you have given us figures on the average car age, the numbers are given by the EU. But can you also give us figures on whether owners, how many cars the owners have, 1 or 2? Or I'm most concerned with the effect it might have on people who are in the industry, because it might affect the job opportunities for many already in the industry. Well, I know that you may not have the details on the years the cars have been in use, but I do hope that you could also include this so that the public would find it easier to understand. Four parts to the question. Yes, we would try to look into these matters because we're also talking about car pollution, emission pollution as well. So I think that if we could acquire all this information, and it would be good for all. But I understand your question. Well, when we're trying to tighten up the restrictions, how would that affect the transportation industry? First of all, we understand where the different pollution comes from. I'm sure that you're most interested in car emissions, but do not forget that when we look at the overall pollution, you would find who the largest pollutants are. But if you look at the health risk, of course, road pollution would be the most important consideration. But we would explain it to you further in the upcoming meetings. Thank you. Mr. Chong, please. Thank you. I'd also like to follow up on the exceedances. I don't think that we should relax the exceedances allowed. Well, let's say for PM10, number of exceedances allowed is 1 now. It would be increased to 9 in the future. Well, you're allowing them with 9 exceedances. Well, the exceedances might be higher than those right now. So I would like you to give us figures on how much the exceedances would be currently and for the proposed AQOs. And whether there is a huge difference between our standards and those of other countries. I don't want to relax, the exceedances allowed, because, if that is the case, I don't think we need to amend the AQOs. And I really do think you need to look into nitrogen dioxide. How can you allow the exceedances to increase from 3 to 18? If you cannot do something about it, I don't think we need to amend the AQOs at all. Thank you. Yes, we would look into the figures again. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Mr. Wu, thank you. I would like to understand the proposed AQOs. Part of it has not been completed. I think that the main direction of the administration is to try to reach the goal or objective ultimately. We've discussed for a long time about other air quality enhancement measures. We're talking about a review every 5 years. That means that within the 5 years, we would need to start work into looking at how we can improve matters. I want to see whether the government can tell us what the next step would be after trying to enhance the air quality, to give us a time frame so that the general public would be able to accept this gradually. Otherwise, it might affect the employment opportunities for those in the industry. And if you could give us a time frame, you could tell us about what would be done in 10 years, then I think it would be easier for the general public to understand and to accept. So what would we be doing and what kind of measures we will be taking in order to reach our ultimate goal? Well, we have set up out directions in our blueprint, and that includes some of those policies that we have already decided on. I think it is a very appropriate question for policies that have not been decided and those that are related to other departments. I do not mind using our blueprint to try to explain to you in further detail. what we would like to be done. Of course, we would want to try to lower emissions on the road because that affects everybody's health. And we could also talk to Guangdong what we could do together to try to reduce emissions. Well, I don't mind sharing with you the details. These are all the directions we are going to take. But this is not something that we have already committed to because it takes time for us to do everything. So I'm not sure what we are doing right now can really satisfy your queries. Well, in the past 10 years, there has been a exponential increase in the number of cars on the road. There's been a 20% increase.
As the Undersecretary has said, roadside pollution is serious. So 2 ways to go about it: curb the growth of private cars. Second, make sure that the new vehicle models are in line with very stringent emission standards. So I'm interested to know about such policies. I do appreciate that some of the policies are outside your own bureau. However, if you don't include it on the agenda, then other departments would think that it is not their responsibility. So I'm not quite sure as to whether the AQOs can really be achieved. We do have a consensus here. First of all, we are talking about the tightening up of the AQOs within this bill. Now, between now and 2020, as we have already set ourselves certain targets, we want to find out what we have to do in order to achieve the targets for 2020. We can brief you on this. If you go further down the road, my question is, do you wish to have it discussed by the EA panel? I don't want to mix issues up within the context of a Bills Committee meeting. I don't mind answering the questions. Yes, of course. But we are also duty-bound to find out how you're going to achieve the stricter targets. Yes, I'll give a broad reply. But I hope that the Bills Committee would not be rendered into an occasion for policy discussion. So if we have such an agreement, we can have it discussed at a PEA panel meeting. Tony Chair, Mr. Chairman, I want to say something here. Of course, I strongly support the enhancement of the air quality. We should tighten up the AQOs. I hope the bill can be introduced soon so that next year we have the new AQOs. With the new AQOs, then we'll have new requirements, and then everything else would fall into place. Otherwise, it is not going to be effective. Other than setting the new targets, of course, just now we have been told about the approval process and also stricter requirements when it comes to EIA studies. In addition, we really hope that the targets can be achieved. But at the same time, what about the number of exceedances allowed? Maybe the Undersecretary can also look at this. When you set the number of exceedances allowed, are they reasonable? We need to be pragmatic. Some people have queried you for tightening up the AQOs and yet you increase the number of allowed exceedances. There are some things beyond our control. I don't think we should wait for the day when we're able to have no exceedances and then we have the new AQOs. I think we need to set ourselves a goal and then we'll move in that direction. Sometimes it is within our own control. Sometimes things may not be entirely in our control, but still we need to make the first step. So please don't drag your feet. When it comes to environmental protection, the environment is a huge thing. And I suggest that we should focus on what is in the bill. For the other policies, I think they can be taken up on other occasions. Thank you. Yes, I think the Undersecretary made it clear that she very much hoped that this could come into effect on 1st of January 2014. So we should try our best to finish the scrutiny within this year. I don't think members would object to it. Any reply? I think the member asked a very good question. That is, we need to explain to the public as to what's meant by the number of exceedances allowed, and the rationale. If it is acceptable, it's best. And I'm sure, in fact, we can sort of devise a work plan. There are a few areas of interest to you. Maybe it will be more effective if we can sort of focus on one or two topics at any one meeting. Let's finish with all the questions, and then we can have a go at that. Mr. Lo Wai Kwok. Of course, we support the bill, and we have to be realistic. Air quality improvement doesn't just rely on legislation. We need to conserve energy. We need to reduce the emission from all sources. We need to improve the quality of our fuel. We have to improve the vehicle models. Now, I think members of the Bills Committee should avoid doing the following. Well, in fact, there were a lot of controversies in the previous consultation. I don't want to say an extension of that previous debate. I think we should focus on the bill, in particular the legislative provisions. In the past, the debate was why we shouldn't just jump to the ultimate targets of the WHO. Why are we adopting the interim targets instead? Of course, in the course of the debate, we've been told that we could very well set ourselves very high standards, but if we couldn't achieve the AQOs, we could still not bring any beneficial health effects to the community. So I hope that in the time to come, we can focus on the bill itself rather than repeating the arguments that arose in the previous debate. There are many figures here. Are we supposed to go over the experts' reports again? Members asked valid questions like the source of emission. But what worries me is that if we just extend the scope of the debate, it will become a highly technical and complicated briefing, and it may not actually be the objective of this Bills Committee, which is to scrutinize the bill. Undersecretary, we are now presenting this bill. Of course, it means that we have got a clearance from the government departments. For certain targets, if we want to deliver our promise, we need the cooperation from other departments. There is already a consensus from within the government. If we want to change the targets, of course, it requires further discussion. Members said that if we would like to have it coming into effect on the 1st of January, I hope that we can be effective and efficient in our discussion. But of course, you have asked many important questions, like the basis for the calculation of the number of exceedances allowed. That's the first point. Second point is about the gauge crashing possibility. I think probably if we can give a detailed reply, we can answer most of your questions. We have to discharge our responsibilities properly. We don't want to see problems arising in the future. Mr. Low, any other questions? No, then Mr. Tang for the second time. Mr. Chairman, a simple one. I'm mainly interested in the AQOs. You have been comprehensive, you have been very responsible, you have come up with a large number of annexes to the paper. In Annex C, you have the air quality improvement measures. Other than vehicles, I'm also interested in power supply. We have the review of the agreements for the two power companies. Now, for the ratio of natural gas in local electricity generation, having it raised to 50%, I think the desulfurization is effective. So would it be enhanced to beyond 50%? And are you going to impose a statutory requirement on energy conservation? Of course, as part of the work of the Bills Committee, we shouldn't be spending too much time on this particular point. But still, I think as far as power company is concerned, in 2018, we're looking forward to another scheme of control agreement. So I just wonder whether we should be looking at something more than what is stated in the annex. We have already set out certain targets, certain directions. We have a roadmap for air quality. It is a strategic document for the current term government. Well, let me give you a reply in this way. I note Mr. Tang's question. I'll go back to see if I can give you something clearer. I just hope that you can understand that certain issues may not be the right topics for this Bills Committee. Perhaps it could be taken care of elsewhere. I'm sure you know that very soon we're going to start our discussion about the fuel mix. As to whether it is going to change the air pollution drastically or change our air quality policy drastically, probably not. If you use more coal, what will happen? And would you want to use more nuclear power? Well, when it comes to power generation, yes, there will be impact on emission. But I'm afraid that the broad direction is clear enough. For the passage of this bill, should we dwell too much on such points? Probably not. But I note your arguments. You have also said that this is not supposed to be the battlefield for the fuel mix or power supply. Yes, we aren't having panel meetings here. I'm sure I will try to exercise certain control to achieve that. Next, Mr. Michael Tian. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've refrained from asking questions despite having been here for a long time because I don't know what to ask and I don't want to ask silly questions. I've listened to members, perhaps the the Undersecretary to give us some background information. Basically, we have already got some current targets. In some areas, we haven't got targets. Now you want to change the existing targets and introduce new targets. What are we using them for? Yes, I can understand the implications on projects. In future, when you want to implement projects, you need to come up with EIA reports. If you can't deliver, you'll be penalized. But other than that, for projects, we can apply the provisions of this bill. But what about the daily life of our community? What is the implication in the long term? Does it mean that if somebody does something, if he causes an accident, and then he'll be subject to punishment, or what? or would it just be facilitating the government in coming up with the early replacement of vehicles? So please tell us what they are for. Otherwise, the people outside the LegCo will be worried.
This is not something very simple. You talk about you banning tobacco. Yes, that is easy to understand. But for this, the public doesn't really understand how it's going to affect them. Secondly, as I'm not a medical expert, I would like to understand about the health risk. PM seems to be the most dangerous particulate matter because that would affect people's health. We see that we're talking about 2010 for the standards, and then for the WHO is already at 25. I don't understand these figures. You see that our emission is 1 to 99. I think that there is nothing we can do. We are very passive. Without the improvement of the Pearl River Delta, we wouldn't be able to do anything. What can we do in Hong Kong to reduce PM 2.5? Can we also try to reduce it from 75 to 50 to 25? Well, unless this 1 to 99 from the Pearl River Delta is improved, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do anything because of the emissions are in the proportion of 1 to 99 for Hong Kong to the PRD region. Is there a time frame for us that Hong Kong would be able to be almost on par with the standards of other countries? Ms. Low, can you briefly respond on how it's going to affect the public? Well, in the next meeting, I'm sure you will give us more scientific figures. Yes, we are going to supplement on these two questions in detail. I'll try to be brief right now. I'll try to give you a short explanation and to try to make it clear. The AQOs are actually like a ruler. The PAC chairman in the past said that might say that, you've also had a ruler before, but you've never tried to really comply with it. I think that we are working towards this direction. Secondly, you need to look at our determination. In order to reach our objectives, we must try to see whether we are successful in tightening the standards. We have set the standards in accordance with the interim targets of the WHO. We are working in agreement with Guangdong to set our own targets, which should be achieved by a few years. And thirdly, how can you ensure Guangdong achieve target and at the same time enhance their improvements? If you look at it from a scientific perspective, we know where the problem lies. Mr. Tian just now pinpointed, which is PM 2.5. Most of the PM 2.5, it comes from secondary pollutants, which are pollutants created from other pollutants. Now, these are related with VOC and ozone. We know that if we're able to reduce emissions in certain areas, it would help in the overall picture. The Guangdong area also knows that it needs to decrease PM 2.5. In China, regardless of north or south, the pollutants concentration and variety are very different from overseas. The concentration is much higher. Therefore, we need to try to reduce emissions based on our scientific research. Mr. Tian, I'm sure, has already visited Beijing for meetings, and pollutants and trying to reduce pollutants is the major focus of the central government. We hope to make an extra effort in certain areas and work together with Guangdong to try to control emissions and to try to control the origin of such pollutants. Well, we in Hong Kong, we can't control what other countries do, but we hope that Hong Kong can try to reduce our own emissions. For example, ship emissions. We do hope that we will be able to implement it in the whole Pearl River Delta. And we also want to try to tighten up standards and to try to reduce emissions for factories on the mainland that are operated by Hong Kong people. Mr. Tan, well, I asked this question because I know what's happening in Beijing. And I understand that although there is this aspiration of the government to reduce pollutants, the problem is too major. I don't understand how to understand this 1 to 99 pollutant proportion. I want to understand if Hong Kong makes an extra effort to do everything it could to reduce pollutants, and if Guangdong maintains the same, does it mean that we're never going to achieve the goals? Is it if Guangdong doesn't do anything about it, then even if we try our best, we're not going to achieve any goal? I think we should look at it from the reverse. We can greatly reduce emissions in the regional level and the national level. So I'm looking at it from a positive perspective. I'm not being negative. I'm just giving a hypothesis. Let's say Guangdong is moving so slowly that it doesn't help at all. Well, it needs partnership before we could greatly reduce pollutants. Okay, understood. I think we should address Mr. Chin's first question. What kind of impact it would have for the public? Yes, for banning of tobacco, we know where we could ban smoking in certain areas. Well, I could address Mr. Tan's question. Once we pass the new AQOs, I think that first the new AQOs would be our new standard. All emission measures would use this as the indicator. We would try to target power plants and cars and try to lower emissions. Secondly, currently in Hong Kong, there are certain industries that give off higher concentration of pollution. And they would need to comply with additional conditions. Because if we tighten up the measures, it might affect the operations of these factories and industries. So we would try to understand whether there is a need to tighten the measures. Thirdly, the new AQOs would also be used under the EIAO to assess environmental impact. So once the new AQOs are approved, this ruler wouldn't be tightened. So the second point is what I wanted to ask about, and I think you've addressed it. So once it's implemented, you would use that as an indicator to issue permits in the future. I just want to understand how binding it is. So once you implement the new AQOs, all polluting industries would need to meet these AQOs before they would get the permit. For industries, for factories, very often they would have additional conditions. And we would use the air pollution control bill as indicator. As to details, Mr. Pang can explain further. Well, when we approve permits, we need to consider a few factors. First, to use the most feasible technology to lower pollution. And secondly, whether it could meet the AQOs. Thirdly, whether it would affect health. So we would consider these three factors. Once the AQOs are amended, we would review the technology to see whether there are other ways to reduce pollutants so that they would not be in violation of the AQOs. Thank you. I think we've exceeded our time. Mr. Shek, please. Chairman. Well, although you've responded to it, but I hope that you would understand that objectives and permits are two different matters, because permits have their own regulations. You need to meet certain conditions before a permit could be awarded. Don't let the society have the misunderstanding that these two are the same, because we've never been able to meet any of the objectives in the past years. I hope that when we implement it in 2014, it could finally be met. This could only be seen as a target. Roadside pollution, ship pollution, power plant pollution. How can these help us to meet the targets? Our targets are already very low compared to international standards. What are the government policies to work to get to help meet the targets? How do you explain PM 2.5 to the public? We know this is really technical, or it's very difficult to understand what it is. It seems to me that the PM 2.5 with the tightening of the PM 2.5, it would affect many industries. How can you comply with the AQOs? You can't just say that with a new AQO you would cut it across the board, because it would affect the overall economy and it would bring instability to the economic and commercial sector. So please state very clearly what the objectives of the new AQOs would be. And I think you need to look into the impact it would have on society. Chairman, Mr. Shek's understanding is entirely correct. The new AQOs would be one of the main three considerations for awarding permits in the future. It's not the sole consideration, but one of the three major ones. Factories and manufacturers would need to make an extra effort to reduce pollution. Another consideration is to look at whether there is really technical feasibility. We use this principle to work together with factories, such as factories for appliances. we have let them know that we are proposing new AQOs. Pollution needs to be reduced, and we hope that they will try to adopt new measures to try to reach these goals. We're not saying that you must stop operation if you do not comply with the AQOs. Mr. Tam, yes, Mr. Pang, yes, I'd like to supplement. Mr. Lai has already explained to us. We are considering in the AQOs that for some things, the objectives would not be met under the new AQOs. But are they really working towards the new objectives? That is what we are looking at.
Sorry, I should have given Mrs. Ho the floor for the second round of questions, but I got it wrong, so I'll give you the floor now. It doesn't matter, Chairman. We still have plenty of time. 3 questions. I think the timing is tight. You want it to come into operation before end of the year, but then it is not going to have a lot of pages. I think we can beat the deadline unless we have to be scrutinizing something else day in, day out. I want to know whether we need to approve further subsidiary legislation before this will actually come into operation. So please clarify this point. Second, for incinerators, airport runway, of course they're subject to a IAO process, but then other government policies may also have a pollution impact. Like if we allow vehicles from the mainland to come to Hong Kong, then the local emission will change in terms of the level. So I hope that the EPD will play this role. That is, whenever the government launches a new policy, you are duty bound to advise the government of the pollution impact. Tell the administration that a policy may see exceedances of the AQOs unless, say for example, the government is to fund the entire replacement of the bus fleet. You say that the AQOs won't be the sole reason for vetoing a license application, but still I hope that you will play the monitoring role, and I hope that the administration will respect the role of this government and don't just change the officer in charge if the advice is not pleasing to the ear. In the case of the airport, I understand that there was a director who stood firm in relation to a EIA report, and then he was replaced. Now, Annex B, number of exceedances allowed. Members are concerned. I understand what the Undersecretary has been saying. We are now trying to tighten up the AQOs. So the number of exceedances allowed will be more than before. I think we'll come back to justify the new figures. There are 2 items for which we don't have existing AQOs. First of all, the PM 2.5, and second, the sulfur dioxide 10-minute. What is the current picture? We need to know about the status quo before we can have a comparison and try to tell, upon adoption of the WHO IT1, which is the most basic one for PM 2.5, and then for the 10-minute one, we are going to adopt the ultimate target of the WHO. Now, in the interim, for PM 2.5, we are adopting the lowest target. Would it be a progress, or is it already a very good one? It doesn't matter. For the number of exceedances allowed, we're going to give an overall reply. What about the earlier question? We don't need further subsidiary legislation. In the case of new items which would affect our compliance, if somebody is to propose a project, I'm sure we will have this considered. Michael Tian for the second time. Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify a point in the reply. I'm afraid I still don't quite understand. Assuming that I'm a businessman, I have a particular process which would emit the fine suspended particulars. I've never paid attention to it because we haven't got any current AQOs. The government just leave me alone. Now you will be having the new AQOs. Now if I'm to continue with my process, according to your requirements, I will take measurements, and then I found that it is not 300, it is not 75 as allowed, but 300, 400. Now you say that before issuing me with a license, you would ask me to sit down and have a talk. If it is technically feasible, you would ask me to do something about it. My question is simple. If there isn't a technology to enable me to reduce the reading of 300 to 75 or 35, will I still be allowed to continue? Probably, money can solve the problem. It may be to the tune of tens of millions of dollars by way of investment. But if it asks for an extra investment of tens of millions of dollars, would it be regarded as technically not feasible? We can prepare some information to talk about the licenses to be issued and have a bearing on quality of air. Mr. Lai used the example of power plant. Of course, it's a major source of emission. When compared with a small workshop, the difference is huge. For examples like the power plants, all along we do have a mechanism to discuss with the power plants as to how emissions can be lowered. A lot of money will be incurred, like desulfurization and others. And then we have this scheme to replace the diesel commercial vehicles. It is sort of like a tug of war. We have 80,000 diesel vehicles. In how many years' time would we see them to be replaced by better vehicles so that the roadside pollution and also the atmospheric pollution will be improved? I think such measures can be done. Perhaps first of all, let's talk about the licensing process. And then for other problems, like in the case of vehicles, they're not subject to licensing, but we have to rely on other initiatives. For specified process, it is talk about large-scale processes. 23 of them are being specified under the law, like the power plants and also cement plant. They're of larger scale, and then their impact is huge, and that's why we've been using the licensing process to manage it. For other processes, we try to see what technically feasible solutions are available. In the case of diesel vehicles, maybe we'll rely on a regulation to impose certain technologies to reduce the emission. So we can count on a regulation to do that. For specified processes, what it means is that we'll sit down with the licensee to find out what technologies can be relied upon to reduce the emission. Upon the amendment of the legislation, we will certainly look at the contribution of a particular plant towards the pollution. Sometimes we can ask for the chimney to be extended so that the emission is at a higher level and then the impact can be reduced. Take the specified processes as an example. And they're subject to licensing. Now you say that if it is technically not feasible, you will still give the license to them. It depends. It depends on the actual contribution towards air pollution. Maybe the volume is huge, say in the example of power plant. Yes, the emission volume is huge, but then by raising the height of the chimney, after dispersion, maybe the impact is not that huge. And in this case, we can still continue to issue a license. It doesn't matter. You have an established methodology to check whether they are achieving the targets. If they have been measured at a height of 500 feet, then you just use the same method. Now, if the readings exceed the objectives and if there are no technical solutions, are you still going to issue a license to them? We won't be taking the readings at 500 feet. Well, I think it's an apple talking to an orange. I think we should clarify the licensing procedures, and then you can ask for the questions. Yes, let's take the mechanism as a whole. I don't think when it comes to licensing, we won't be subjective. Yes, exactly. I want you to tell me how the future licensing procedures will be affected by your bill. All right, no other members are in the queue to ask questions. We have 10 minutes or so. I think we need to decide on a few things. Days of meetings, and then maybe first of all, we have asked many questions. Probably we have to classify the questions. Maybe the Undersecretary and the other officials would have some idea. The Secretariat has kindly classified them into 4 groups. First of all, application of the bill and impact on the public. Second, how to handle the gauge crashing applications. Thirdly, number of exceedances and the rationale. We may want more scientific information. And fourthly, the licensing mechanism and how it is to be affected by the bill. I think Mr. Michael Tian asked quite a large number of questions along that line. So, Bureau, any suggestions? Of course, that we have the 5-year review mechanism as well. Perhaps we can include it within the AQO explanation. Mr. Chairman, would you like to have the public hearing first? Or do you want it to be done in parallel? Yes, maybe we can fix a date for the public hearing. We agree entirely with your classification of the topics into 4 groups. What about the priority? The application and impact on the public, I think that can be dealt with first. I think that can be done within 1 meeting. And then AQOs and exceedances, or you want to take up the question about the EIA. Do you have any preference? To me, all of them have to be worked on. Unless some members have very strong views concerning the sequence. Otherwise, I would suggest that whenever you are ready. Mr. Ho, perhaps I didn't see your hand.
Yes, because you left out my other question on the PM 2.5 and the nitrogen dioxide on what is the current pollution. I think that would and go under the statistics and figures. Yeah, I would suggest we hold the public hearing first because the NGOs and other organizations would have their views, and we could perhaps first hear their views, which would help us to follow up on this issue. Yes, the Secretariat has proposed 2 time slots for your consideration. First one is April 29th, 10:45 in the morning. But if you use that time slot for the public hearing, it would be kind of rush. So we could first ask perhaps ask administration to first try to address all our concerns today on that day, and we could use the May 10th, the second time slot, to be the public hearing. Would that be all right for all members? Madam Ho? Well, of course, we would want to hold the public hearing as soon as possible, but I think that, April 29th might be a bit rush. We want to try to address some of our concerns at the same time. How about we address the concerns raised by Mr. Tian on the impact on the industry and the permit mechanism? Because, well, yes, and we could talk about the AQOs, and then the second time slot we could conduct a public hearing, and then in the third meeting we could talk about the AQOs, all the figures, and then talk about the relation to the EIA. So, yes, on the 29th, we would first talk about the 2 questions raised to address the concerns raised mainly by Mr. Tian. And then we would conduct the public hearing. And then the meeting after that, probably around mid-May or end of May, we will talk about statistics and the figures. Any questions? Yes, Madam Ho. Well, let's say that we don't need to work from 9 in the morning to 11 at night, starting from next week. We could perhaps raise it in our meeting, that I hope that members will not just spend all their time at the budget meeting. Instead, well, we can't really come to a decision here. Yes, I hope that members in this committee to try to continue with other bills, even though the budget meeting is going on. But this is something out of our control. We can discuss this issue on a different occasion. Okay, yes, so we will follow the proposal I made earlier. Any other business? Earlier we mentioned inviting experts. Well, we are going to invite public members to attend our public hearing. But if you can think of experts you want to invite over, I hope that you would give the details to the Secretariat so that we would proactively invite them to attend our public hearing. Any other businesses? If not, this concludes our meeting today. Thank you.